So this is Dr. Z. I'll do a little bit about her without spoiling the whole art talk. Um, so she is a lecturer in the Lewis Honors College, and she also works with the faculty. She's a faculty member. I was reading your bio and talking at the same time about something else. So she's involved in the Appalachian Studies program in the Department of Anthropology. But really, I feel like you do a little bit of everything. Like you're very involved in a whole bunch of stuff and you have such a diverse background. So we can get started. So why don't you just introduce yourself? I guess I gave a little bit about it, but kind of your name, what you do right now at UK.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dr. Zada Komara. I go by Dr. Z. Those of you who've had me in class know that because I think it sounds cooler, honestly. Um, I am, by training, an archaeologist of the recent past, and I study 20th century Appalachia specifically, Central Appalachia most specifically. And I'm really interested in gender and class and race and how that intersects with material culture. So all this like everyday stuff that we have around us and are currently sitting on and use, all the way to like landscapes, like how these things intersect basically to like help us do gender and class and race. I'm really interested in consumerism, specifically consumer material culture, like all this mass produced stuff we use in everyday life, like medicine and dishes and prepackaged foods and home furnishings and all this stuff like that. And so I get to do, because, I study the recent past, I get to do more than just dig in the ground. I get to talk to people who are still living, who lived through the events that I'm talking about. So I get to do some oral history. I get to do a lot of archival work, looking at documents and photographs from the past, things like, the census reports, a little bit of everything. And, I know this is an art talk, so I'll say that, I've tried to push myself as a scholar to be, more and more creative about how I do these things. So like, I'm a photographer also, and I used to think like, oh, I'm a photographer on the side, and more I've realized like there is such a good intentional space for like the intersection of art and scholarship, and I've really been trying to explore that more in the past few years.
Cool. So obviously, or probably, but you wouldn't know what all of those things were when you were a kid. So when you were really little as a child, what was your dream job?
So that is a really good question. I think people have seen a lot of movies about archaeology, and I think they usually take place in Egypt, and somebody awakens like a supernatural evil, and everybody's in coordinated like beige outfits, and everybody looks super cool. And something about like this glamorization of my field leads people to believe that like I must have known I wanted to be an archaeologist as a child, and that could not be farther from the truth. I did not have like the most realistic goals as a kid. It's funny what you told me you were going to ask this question. I was like, what did I want to be when I grew up? And I
Mhm.
came up with like three things. I really wanted to be Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2. Um, she's ripped. She's a feminist. She's in charge. I also really wanted to be the Predator, a related movie franchise. And then, like, sort of as an afterthought, I was like, I've seen like FBI agents on the television. That would be really fun. So that's like a very bizarre lineup of things, like a woman who fights robots from the future, an alien who hunts people in the present, or like a badass that solves mysteries. I do get to solve mysteries sometimes, though. Like tracking down, people who have been, lost in our contemporary memory, like through the census, or tracking down, archaeological sites that we don't know where they are or we have questions about them. So, like, I do get to assemble clues. And the fun thing about it is I get to use them to tell a good story that hopefully, like, does good work out there in the world. I no longer want to work for the FBI. I'm not like a huge fan of like the prison industrial complex. But I do still want to be Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2. So, goals.
Yeah, maybe that'll happen still. You never know. So, what could you tell us a little bit about your background and educational experience that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I have triple degrees in anthropology. And I think, like a lot of other, folks who grew up in a small town with, like, a very narrow scope of, fields represented by teachers and curriculum, I didn't know what anthropology was. And I took intro to anthropology as an undergraduate because it was required, like it is at UK. Like we had a core social science requirement. And in class on the first day, this guy got up in front of the room and he said, I worked on an island in Melanesia in the 60s, and I studied medical anthropology, and started talking about, yam production. He started talking about like crops and the intersection of like foodways with medicine. I was looking around at all the other people in the room and I was like, oh, this is all other weirdos who like have always had these big questions about human social life, and maybe grew up in a way that they felt like I don't really fit in. And that's how I felt as somebody who grew up poor in northern Appalachia, like a little bit too smart, a little bit too weird, like a little bit too rural to compete with anybody on a national stage, or at least that's how I felt. And anthropology really, it really opened up the whole world to me. And I realized, like, there's no natural or right or given way of living or being or thinking. And I was hooked, man. I was hooked. And in my undergrad, we didn't really focus on a career track, but I knew I wanted to do archaeology because I was really interested in material culture. I think because I grew up poor, like things just really stood out to me, like the importance of materiality and making us who we are. And so I went to grad school at UK and did my master's degree. And that's where I really found, like, I wanted to focus on Appalachian studies because of this like representation around the region as a backwards place that's trapped in the past, or that's somehow like a deviation from the American norm. And I really thought, like, I want to help people in communities like where I live and like where I grew up. And so I did my PhD, focused on archaeology, and worked in Eastern Kentucky. And that's kind of like my origin story.
Got this whole superhero theme going on. So, what does a typical day look like for you? And if you want, you can do a little pre and during COVID scenario if you want to.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a good question. And I feel like you're asking about the pre and post COVID situation because you were in my class when I took my phone out to do archaeological fieldwork in Western Kentucky and took you all with me on the phone and set it
Yeah.
up on a tripod. Like, y'all want to know what shovel testing looks like? Like, let me tell you about what contract archaeology is. So, like pre-COVID, actually, like during COVID, I take, I take a few different roles. Like one, I'm a professor. I'm also a researcher, and I do also do contract archaeology, usually in the summer. So any archaeology done in advance of development, you have to do an archaeological assessment if you're going to use federal funds or work on federal land. And I do that for money, but also I really like to go outside. I like the chance to see places all over the eastern U.S. that most people wouldn't go because all they've got there is maybe like a Hardee's and a Dairy Queen and a post office. And I'm like, I would love to see this place. Sounds great. So as a professor, um, I read a lot. I talk to smart people about what I read. I get to teach in honors, so it's just basically like hanging out with other smart people and discussing things where we all bring our expertise in. Now, I Zoom a lot. I Zoom a lot. Um, I hang out in office hours a lot. That's virtual now sometimes. Um, I'm as a professor, I'm really lucky to work on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council for the Lewis Honors College. I'm also the faculty sponsor for our Appalachian Club. And I also started, a student, Taylor Sena, and I started the Pseudoscience Supper Club as a way to talk about, pseudoscientific issues that are affecting us today. So sometimes I get to do some really cool programming. And as a researcher, I feel like I'm always writing. I feel like I'm always working on some publication. Um, I'm starting to work now on an oral history project that a few of you were participated in, the College Life Oral History Project, where you all interviewed each other about life at college. It was cool. That project started before COVID, and now, like during COVID, folks have really been talking about like the impact on their education and their social life during COVID. So I'm starting to like code all of these interviews and pull themes out because I want to start presenting about it. I'll spoil the paper I'm going to write for you, which is that I really think that doing like student-led oral history, I think it really helps build a sense of community, or at least, some connection that I feel has really been lost between you all during COVID. You can't really hang out anymore unless you're sneaking people into your dorm room, which I found out is happening through these oral history interviews. But like, other than that, like, I feel like kind of experienced a loss in community. So I'm really excited to start on that. um, I lately have been starting to think about digitizing an exhibit that's up over in special collections called Consuming Appalachia. That's artifacts from the early 20th century from coal towns, archival photos. And there was an oral history component, but that never got finished because COVID. COVID has really changed a lot. So I'm trying to like work on the art part of my career there and get that exhibit digitized, which Anna, by the way, did all the graphic design for all the signage, and it's just amazing. Um, and like normally, like pre-COVID, I would have already had an active research project going for the summer, but all of my ideas have been like really impacted by COVID, and I'm not sure at this point. But when the summer starts, that's when I'm going to switch over into contract archaeology mode, um, which is, if you accompanied me on my fieldwork journey, it's like you look at a lot of maps, you drive to like a cornfield or a Dairy Queen, you dig some small holes, you record cultural materials, you take photos. Maybe if you get a really sexy project, you get to do like a huge block excavation with features and architectural remains. Um, and then you do a lot more paperwork. I don't think people realize, like, you don't see that in the movies. Like Indiana Jones, you never see, like the 60 hours a week that he spends writing up all of his adventures. So it's honestly a lot of writing.
That sounds like it. So based on the things that you know now, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a young student? I
Ooh,
guess youngish.
I would honestly say being a mentor is one of the best parts of my current job. So I love this question. I think I would give three related pieces of advice. And the first one being like, get you a mentor who's done this before. So find somebody who does the kind of work that you are doing or you think you want to do, that's done it successfully, and that you think will push you to expand your thinking about it. And I would say bother this person as often as possible about how to succeed on your path. And then, on an entirely different note, also get you a mentor that's done something entirely different from what you're doing. And bother them often about how you can confound your path. Because this is like really the story of how I became an interdisciplinary scholar. Archaeology and Appalachian studies haven't had the biggest overlap, but I have to say, like, working in Appalachian studies, people are always asking me really hard questions about like, is archaeology relevant? Like, explain right now how this is relevant. Explain how you're helping communities, and then actually help them. It's like, oh no. And then, like on the Appalachian Studies angle, it's like, I get to, impress upon people the importance of material culture, especially in representation. Because a lot of representation about the region like looks to material culture like, oh, like, look at these backward people, they live in mobile homes, they lived in log cabins before, they're stuck in the past and they don't understand progress. So get you a mentor that's done something entirely different, that will sort of give you the hard questions all the time. And then, related to both of those things, I'd say, take intellectual risks and merge things that you care about. And one thing I love about honors is like, like you, Anna, you play like 19 different instruments, and you're also like, you're really interested in graphic design, and you love math, and you volunteer for everything. Like, take a risk. Like, if you love something, not that you have to like commodify it, and that, like, I'm not promoting hustle culture here in any way, but if you love two very different things, chances are like the intersection of these things is where you'll find your passion, and where you'll actually be able to make a difference. Like, all these different things that you care about or that you could challenge yourself to try that you've never tried before, I think really give you the so what factor for anything that you want to do. You know, you can take an engineering program and you can learn how to build a really nice bridge. But, maybe in, merging social science with that or art with that, you really explore, why that bridge matters, why serving communities on a transportation node really matters and how that project can be beautiful and impactful. So get some good mentors, and take as many risks as you possibly can without the fear of failure. Um, because I should have failed at 1,000 points in my career, but because I was having a good time, I kept going, and I think that's what made it really meaningful for other people.
That's some really good advice.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, next question. What do you consider to be your most successful career move or moment?
Hmm. Ooh, I don't. That's a tough one for me. Um, it was a big deal for me to pick archaeology, um, especially since I always wanted to be, and probably still want to be, a linguist. I love linguistics. I love language. I mean, what more beautiful exploration of knowledge in the human experience? Um, I I I instead of like talking about like something very like a specific career move, I think I'll talk about like a specific career moment. I always wanted to be a teacher because my dad was a teacher. He was a college professor. He died, as a lot of you know, in March of last year in 2019. And I was just always really inspired by what he did. And I know he was really strong in a curricular sense. Like he taught a baller class because he was good in his field. He was a linguist and a speech and hearing scientist. But the connection that he made to people went well beyond his academic cred, and it was all about I think it was all about him really embracing everybody's mutual humanity. I mean, students loved him. They would, when he got cancer and then when he got sick, my mother had to take the phone off the hook because people kept calling. And it really, while he was passing away, it took him a while. He had a series of strokes during the early stages of the pandemic, is when I really started to embrace the role of emotion in teaching because I could not do otherwise. Anna, you had me for class then, and it's it's deeply humbling when you have to tell all of your classes as a professor, hey, I'm really not okay right now, and this is bad for all of us, and let's just sit in that for a minute. And I think as a woman educator, I had always been taught, for very good reason, because sexism, because patriarchy, that I shouldn't be too emotionally vulnerable, that I needed to maintain some sort of standard of authority, by just being a bad bitch all the time. And of course I am. But it was really during the early stages of the pandemic when everybody was just hurting and confused and anxious and unsure about the future, that like the option to not embrace the role of emotion and educating was really taken away from me. And I just went with it. And I found out that that's really what makes a good teacher. It doesn't make you, being vulnerable doesn't make you weak. And I really learned that. And it's something that I had to learn because I was too afraid to do it before. And as such, like I have more of a connection. That semester and forward, I've had more of a connection with students than I ever have before. And there is a role for emotion in teaching, obviously. Like knowledge isn't objective, and everybody's experience in college, regardless of their position, is extremely subjective. And like that aspect of knowledge is really, really, really relevant. So I have to say, like, getting up in my feels in a productive way was probably like my most transformative moment in my career. And I'm never going back. I will you will all be suffering from too much information for the rest of my career and being prompted to do the same. And it's like really revolutionized my teaching and my mentorship.
Yeah. We are some of us are in a communications class right now that like our unit this week is like vulnerability in like group work. And so I was just like I had not ever thought about that before. I know like three of us in the Zoom are, so I was like, anyway. So, what do you think a role, or I just did not say that right. What role does an artist or a person like yourself play in our society as a whole?
Ooh, so I think for me specifically, like the whole point of my work is not about broken dishes. That would be extremely boring. I think the point of my work is really connecting people to nuanced and diverse pasts that challenge all the bigotry and the assumptions that we hold and that we keep upholding through material culture. Right? Like I can't tell you how many think pieces I've read that have just thrown rural Americans under the bus because of the houses that they live in, or the clothes that they wear, or how they organize their landscapes. Um, and as such, like I think materials are really evocative. Like we're all wearing clothes. We're all and you all appear to be inside of a structure. They materials confront us and they entice us with that physicality. Why do people like to go to museums? Why do people like to go to petting zoos? Why do they like to go anywhere like a science museum where you get to touch stuff? That's always way better than just looking at things. And I think it's because we make an emotional connection to stuff, right? Um, and through that, we make an emotional connection to each other. And it's all of these connections that we make, like among people and things, in this like dialectical relationship that make the social world. And so, I'm really trying to more and more use like not only material culture but documentation like photography and oral history to tell really meaningful stories. All these artifacts that we use that shape us and that we shape, that they aren't just like a physical text that we read about what really happened. Which I think like TV archaeology, like they're like, land sakes, we've discovered this in Pompeii, and it tells us, and this is how it was. Um, like that's not really like stuff is not like an objective representation of the past, nor are like photographs an objective capture of what's really there. Like they, all these things really dance at the behest of a choreographer. And that's us. Like I see that as all of our roles, just kind of thinking about how we can look at all of these things around us and these social relationships around us and thinking, how could we do or do otherwise? And to me, like the whole point of like artistry and the whole point of being a social scientist is really to confront inequality. If it's not about combating systemic oppression, then what's it for? So I really think that art and materials specifically have such a huge role in this because they make such an emotional connection with people.
Yeah, I really agree. A lot of us here, I mean, in the creative arts LLP, most of us are involved in art in some way, and it is very emotional to each one of us. So that is really something that like plays a big role, I believe. Okay. So what encourages or inspires you in your job currently?
Well, you guys are going to love this answer because it's students, honestly. Students are getting me through the pandemic. Um, I get to look around and honors and at UK and see students who are smarter and kinder and more creative and more risky and more progressive than myself. And like this is not a complacent job to have. I think as a professor, if you ever become complacent and you catch yourself like at a faculty mixer or on the pandemic pedagogy Facebook group and you're saying things like, why won't they do this? And they're always doing that. And can I just rant for a moment about X? If you catch yourself doing that, like you're done, you're burnout. It inspires me that, you all do ask, hard questions and you ask like a lot of me, by saying like, hey, you got to check yourself. Like, this is how like you should negotiate having trans and non-binary students in the classroom. This is how we do now. And I just love that. It inspires me to want to try harder and harder. And I have such good faculty colleagues. So like honors is interdisciplinary. um, and we're from all over different disciplines, and I have to say that's really inspiring. Like Dr. Rebecca Gale Howell is a writer, and I read her stuff all the time now, and she reads my stuff and she gives me feedback, and she's made me so much of a better writer. I realized like I was a relatively sterile academic writer and I need to step it up. Like we can tell a good story in a way that's fun. And Dr. Tuttle, who's got a gender and women's studies background, she's really made me a better mentor by making me think a lot more about unconscious bias and how we don't always see how we treat other people and how that hurts even if we don't intend it to. So students and faculty colleagues are really inspiring me right now. Because honestly, at this point in the pandemic, not a whole lot else is. Sometimes I see like a particularly nice fruit in the grocery store and I have a moment, or you watch something nice on Netflix and you're like, oh, that'll get me through the next 15 minutes. But like overridingly, it's it's being surrounded by like really fun and smart and creative people at my job, where I spend most of my time. So it's like you guys and my faculty colleagues, which is a really nice thing to be able to say.
Yeah, I definitely see that in the LLP here too, because we're not just like an arts program. We offer or like we welcome anyone that's interested in anything to do with the arts, and we really try to focus on a lot of like interdisciplinary things, or karaoke for non-singers, or art projects for everybody, things like that. It's really nice to see everyone come together. So you talked a little bit about thinking about where your research might go next, but right now, like, what do you want to do next, and what are some of your current goals looking forward?
Yeah, so a lot of them are art related. As I was thinking about doing this talk, I thought, maybe I'm not like an artist in maybe the sense that most people consider an artist, but I guess I am. And I've been thinking that I want to do a lot more. I want to do a lot more photography. Like I mentioned that until pretty recently, I've sort of considered that separate from my actual job. I do take a lot of photographs in the field, and I'm always pleased when clients, building like a highway realignment or like a cell tower, like those photos in that report were really nice. Like those are really nicely exposed. And I'm like, yes, I do take a better than average photo of a cornfield. This is true. But I want to do I want to do like more intentional people-based photography. I've done a lot of oral history interviews, and I have to say, like, I haven't really foregrounded taking awesome portraits of people, and I want to be more intentional about that. I've gotten to take some really beautiful ones. Often I'm really tired at the end of an oral history interview, and the person is tired, and I'm like, "Oh, do you want your picture taken?" And they're like, "Honey, not today. Like, I haven't had my hair done." So I think I want to be like more intentional about like setting up like a time and a space, to do some really beautiful and evocative photography of people, because I think, that's kind of like a missing aspect of my oral historical work is people's actual images and being photographed in a way that feels like good and representative to them. My next field project that I do want to do in Eastern Kentucky is doing a material documentation of all of these roadside shrines, specifically on Highway 15, which stretches down most of Eastern Kentucky. It's also a route that has just an extremely high rate of vehicle fatalities, motorcycle fatalities specifically. You get a lot of logging trucks and coal trucks, and it's very twisty, like it's not a good line of sight. And Kentucky has extremely high vehicular fatalities across the state. And as such, you see a tradition of people memorializing folks at the scene of fatal accidents by building these roadside shrines. And they're really, some of them are really different than the rest. They're really personal. Sometimes you'll see articles of clothing, you see a lot of crucifixes. People go back to leave fake flowers, and they really like intentionally curate and take care of these sites that are just like perched on the side of the roadside. And I want to do some material documentation of these. And I decided I just wanted to do all the ones down Highway 15 to start. And that might be like a good way to use like artistic photography and merge it with like material documentation to be able to say something meaningful about people's experiences with death in our commonwealth. And I think it would be the next step of that project. A cool thing to do would be to try to identify some of the families that are keeping up all of these roadside shrines and do some oral history interviews. not only about like these curation practices, but about, people who have passed. And more about like a celebration of life, um, to sort of like build on what I think I want to say about, our high rates of fatality for many reasons in Appalachia. And next, I also really do want to digitize that Consuming Appalachia exhibit so that it can be on the internet and we can use it as a teaching tool, and that, people that I interviewed, people from the region can come see it. Not everyone can get to UK, from Eastern Kentucky. And especially now during the pandemic when special collections and just the university are on COVID hours, like it's hard for people to see that. And I want it to be, more open access. I feel like if you're not really giving back to communities, then you're just being extractive. You're just taking their stories and you're taking their history and you're using it for personal gain. So I really want to digitize that, because so many people did such good work for that, including you, Anna. And I just want to do more I want to do more photography generally. Um, there's a really cool crowdsourced photography project called Looking at Appalachia, which was started by a photographer named Roger May, who's from West Virginia. And the idea was that, Appalachia has often been documented by outsiders, and it's really those images that circulate in the national consciousness. And as such, we get an overrepresentation of like poverty porn and black and white photography and, a whole bunch of other problematic things. And so looking at Appalachia asks people to submit photos just of like, their hometowns, their everyday life, people in their family, their experiences. Um, and as long as they're, in one of the states down Appalachia from New York to Mississippi, you contributed to the project. And I contributed, I've only contributed one, and it was two friends of mine. It was in an outdoor barbecue in Madison County. And I was just, taking photos of friends. And then later they said, I need you to submit that to Looking at Appalachia. And I was like, I'm not like a professional photographer. Not that that's the point of that project, but I was like, is that really a great photo? I don't know. And then I really went back and looked at it. And you can't see their faces. It's two queer friends, a lesbian couple. And you're looking at one of my friends from the back, and she's got a hat on, with a rainbow, and it's got a red brim, and it says "Make America Gay Again." And there's a big Kentucky pin on it, and like big tattoos across her shoulder, and like her girlfriend's hand is on her back. And I thought, you know what? This really is important work here. Just giving people visibility through this Looking at Appalachia project it's just such an amazing endeavor, and I want to contribute to more things like that. And I want to document the Appalachian community where I grew up and submit some images and be more intentional about taking photographs in Eastern Kentucky, where I live now. I consider myself a Kentuckian now, and just I want to do projects like that. And until I get my own off the ground, like I want to contribute to that amazing and beautiful endeavor. This is my plug, by the way, for Looking at Appalachia. For those of you who are from the region or work in the region, like our crowdsourced work really matters. I think even more so than professional photographers. And I'm really happy to say that project now has international acclaim. And so, artists and scholars and community activists and countries across the world are looking at, photographs, beautifully curated photographs that people took of their home communities, maybe with their cell phones. And I think that really matters. I think self-documentation matters. So I want to do more photography.
Yeah, I've seen some of your photos just like on the internet or your Instagram, and I think they're really amazing. I like them a lot.
Thanks.
Okay, so at this point, we just have an open Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Dr. Z, you can unmute yourself or you could put them in the chat to me and I can read them, whatever you want to do. If anyone has anything they've thought of.
I'll go first if anyone doesn't have a question ready. So I'm interested in museum education, which I think kind of relates to what you do. So I was wondering if you had any like advice for how you go about sharing like your research and your findings and presenting them in a way that tells like an engaging and interesting story.
Ooh, yeah. I have to say, my first real exposure to doing this is when we curated this exhibit, Consuming Appalachia. And when you make a museum exhibit, you're dealing with people with, various subjectives when they visit a museum. Some people want to read everything and they read all of the signs and they look at all the things and they do it in an orderly fashion. A lot of people just go all over a museum in a scattershot fashion. They read some of the things, or maybe they read none of the things, and they just look at all the stuff. People come with pre-existing biases. Some people come thinking, I only want to learn about stuff that confirms what I already know or what I'm already interested in. Some people go to a museum because they want to see stuff they've never thought about before. And so it is really hard. I think it's the hardest writing I've ever done in my life, to present information in a way that's going to engage a wide audience, to keep people engaged, and really to tell a good story. My advice for you, if you want to get into that kind of work, is to start reading educational theory. For one, I took a class in grad school called public archaeology, where we read a lot from education about how people learn and what they pay attention to. And then we read a lot from museum studies about how people interact with museum exhibits. And then, like, the other part of that was me starting to read more fiction recently than I have. Um, as scholars, we collect a ton of information and it's really great. We're not always super good at telling a compelling story with that information. Learning to write well is really learning to connect with an audience and tell a story. And sometimes that involves a little bit of embellishment. If you think it's true to the spirit of the information, though, you do that. So, like, if you go see this exhibit that we've got up in special collections, which you can, they're open now and it's just up in the lobby and you can walk through. Instead of, like, I've got cases and cases of stuff, basically. Instead of saying, like, this is whiteware from the early 20th century, it's a refined earthenware, it could be bought cheaply from the Sears catalog. It opens with, like, a story of a woman and she's setting the table for dinner with her family, and it leads you through, like, all of these stereotypes that you probably have about Appalachia, like people eating simple foods, people not being able to afford fancy food or fancy dishes, through, like, thinking about how people participated in modern America and shaped, like, the consumer food revolution and, like, this China mania, this, search for all of these new dishes that were suddenly on the market. And so you're actually just reading a story about a family having dinner. And, the vignette ends with you, like, it leads you through, like, you're eating dinner with the family. And then after dinner, you get up and you listen to, the Buck Rogers program on the radio. And so I think, like, my advice for you is to get really invested in storytelling. There's a whole curation aspect to museum studies. I used to work in a museum, actually. And if you want somebody cool to talk to, I can hook you up with the folks at the William S. Webb Museum of Anthropology on campus. I've hooked some students up with internships or just tours. It's really cool to see, like, the curation side of a museum and to see some of the exhibits that have come out of that museum around campus. So yeah, like I said, get a mentor that you can bother all the time about what you want to do, and that might be me for you. And I can hook you up with other people who do that. And then, really, it's like, start now. Start to think about storytelling and how, people tell stories from various disciplines and what would really connect with people to tell a message that you want them to leave with. Good question.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? Emma.
I just wanted to ask, you had talked about digitizing the College Life Oral History Project, which I think is great because I had a really fun time doing that project. So I was curious if, like, the format would be like an ongoing website where you would continue, like, publishing more projects, or would, after you digitize it, would the project, like, end there?
Well, I love the College Life Oral History Project, by the way, which started in 2018 by student demand. Students, we were talking about oral history, and the class formerly known as Honors 101, it's now Honors 140, which is called Knowledge and Society. And students said, hey, we're talking about oral history and you're an oral historian. What if you taught us how to do this and we did this? In that moment, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess we could do that. I guess we could do that. Let's do that. And now the project has been ongoing ever since, and I hope to continue it this semester. However, like I'm at the whims of, the department. Like I'm doing that through a class that a bunch of us teach, and that might not always be possible. But I do hope to keep that project going. And as you know, Emma, because you did it, the interviews are restricted for 5 years so that you can graduate, and then all the things that you said about, your intro professor to whatever will not get you, a poor grade in the class, or, your mom can't be like, I heard you went to a party. So like that's going to be 5 years gone at that point. The interviews are going to be available online through the Nunn Center for Oral History website. So we have an internationally famous oral history center here at UK, which has pioneered a pretty awesome digital repository. It's like an online indexing system. So some students in the project just did an audio interview because that was pre-COVID and you could actually sit in a room together. There are pros and cons of doing audio versus video. I think most people are more comfortable with audio only because then you're not always wondering what you look like. But when COVID hit, we started doing them through Zoom. And so they're video, most of them are video interviews. So you'll be able to watch and or listen to them through the Nunn Center website. And they'll be indexed so you can kind of go through by segment and pick out what you want to listen to. And like I'm really pleased about that. They're just incredibly rich, I think most of us who have been to college think like, I know what that's like. I did that. Sure, like we've had an experience with that, but hearing about what it's like now, like having you all flesh out, actually like the actual lived experience of college now in 2021, especially now during the pandemic, is very different. And you make this real and you make this experience a lot more human. So those they are currently being digitized, and they will be available like 5 years from whenever the interview was done. And I'm pretty excited about this. One thing I really love about oral history is having people tell me years later that they went back and they listened to their interview and they've really made them think about how things have changed or things have stayed the same, or what's really meaningful. Or when I interview somebody and they pass away, and people essentially have like a living memory there to work through again and again and again. It's very, very beautiful. So I'm really excited, Emma, for you when you're 75 years old to get on the internet and be like, oh Lord, like this is what it was back then. And your grandkids will be like, whoa, is that you?
I know, I feel like that would be so cool to be like actually like have something that I can show like my grandkids like, oh, like this is me in college. Like, isn't that so weird?
They're gonna be like, did you guys wear that stuff for real though?
I'm excited about that also, especially since it was like, it'll be so unique. The ones that are happening right now that are over Zoom with the videos, with all the technical difficulties like recorded into the oral history project.
Yeah, I really like that artifact. I know students were upset when the video or the audio cut out. Or I had one student who's like, my parents will not leave me alone. I got to do this in this minivan. My apologies. And I was like, no, this really adds, like, this really gives you a sense of what it's like to live through this time where we're all slammed on top of our family members, like to the point where you can't get them to leave you alone for 45 minutes while you do an important thing. And like welcome to your mom's minivan. Like what a rich text.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions for Dr. Z? If you can't think of them now, you can always message them to me, and I'm sure Dr. Z would be always happy to email you some answers.
I would love to email you some answers. And those, I don't know if everybody on the Zoom is in honors, but you should get an honors. We have upper level admissions. You should apply now. And then you too can do fun interdisciplinary things. I'm making plugs for a lot of things in this Zoom. Come to honors. We have fun.
We do. The classes are really interesting, especially being like, I'm often the only music major in the class. So it's really interesting to learn from like a lot of different other people. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions, then we can say goodbye to Dr. Z. And then again, You could always find her contact information on the internet or by texting me if you have any follow-up questions.
I will just say that this was awesome, and I really liked the experience. You know, seriously, at this point in the pandemic, you know, you get asked to talk about what inspires you, and you're like, literally nothing. But then when you really you really start to think about it, it's like, it's pretty nice to be able to say, like, it really is like the student interaction that I have here. It's all of you. Like, this is a really fun thing to do because it makes me think about why I love to do this, and you know, really gets me engaged in a way with you all that's outside the classroom, and it's different and it's transformative. And if you're not my student, stop by and meet me sometime. We'll have coffee. And if you are my student, know that I miss you a whole lot, and I wish you'd come bother me in my office again. You have to sit on the floor directly outside the door, but it's still cool, and we can still go have lunch. That's like the loophole. So come have lunch with me.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll say goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Z.
Thank you everybody else. This is awesome.
Rosie's here.
Thank you so much. I got the tail end, so I was so happy to get to hear you a little bit.
Bye, Dr. Z.
And my older one. Thank you.